Welcome to Giving and Receiving Peer Review. We've designed this podcast for medical students, but honestly it could be beneficial for basically anybody in the field of healthcare, whether they're doing clinical research or they're working in a hospital setting, in nursing, allied health, even potentially hospital dentistry. So we hope you enjoy what we have to offer. We're going to talk a little bit today about, firstly, what is peer review? How does it benefit you? Why do we do peer review? There is also an activity embedded in the podcast that gives you the opportunity to perform some peer review. So at a certain point in the podcast, we'll ask you to actually pause the slides or pause the video and perform some peer review yourself and see how you do. And then we'll talk a little bit about responding to peer review. All of us, every single one of us, do get critiqued in a negative way. We get negative feedback, and how we respond to that negative feedback is really important in terms of our professionalism, but also in terms of how we use that feedback, because very often it actually is very valuable and can help us grow. But we have to be able to receive that in a valuable way. Here's a comic that my colleague has inserted there, and for those of you who have already been involved in the process of writing manuscripts, submitting them to journals, and having them go through peer review process, you know that it often can indeed look just like this comic appears, with you trying to get through the line of people who are essentially hammering you with their comments and opinions. But while that's humor, I know in real life it can in fact feel that way. Hopefully we can change your mind with this session. So there's lots of ways that you will experience peer review, both yourself and receiving it and also giving it. And certainly within medical schools, most schools are using the PBL program, and peer review and peer feedback is a part of that. If you're doing in-semester assignments, many teachers choose to incorporate peer review as a part of that. So students working in teams also get to learn and experience peer review and what it means to learn what a peer thinks about them and their performance in an assignment. As we've mentioned, academic publishing is probably one of the biggest areas where peer review is found in terms of submitting articles and then getting them back from journals and looking at the comments and hopefully getting the opportunity to revise and resubmit rather than an outright rejection. But even outright rejections can actually be very helpful. Peer review is also hugely important in the area of research, and if you're submitting a grant application, your grants will go through peer review. But even if you're submitting something as minor or small as a application for some travel funds, those often go through peer review as well. And then there's the medical peer review. So if you're working in a hospital setting or undergoing training in a hospital setting, you'll be exposed to peer review or feedback from your mentors who are actually established physicians. And that peer review and feedback can be very, very valuable to you, and certainly valuable to patients in terms of maintaining standards of safety and quality. But the take-home message here is, and you can see with the yellow star, that once you get into the field of medicine, and I mean that by enrolling in medical school, you're in the field, you're never going to stop the process of peer review. It'll be part of your life forever. Now, there's things that peer review is, and there's things that peer review is not. So let's start out with what peer review is not. It's not an inquisition. It's not meant to hammer you into the ground and to shame you. It's not a time where you are out to show that you're just fantastic and the people around you are just lazy and lame. It's not the time to boast about yourself and your accomplishments and how wonderful you are. It's about performance improvement. So you need to keep that lens in frame, both when you are receiving and when you're giving feedback or peer review. Now, indeed, there are some pitfalls. Sometimes you can be too nice. That really isn't valuable. If you're being too complimentary, beating around the bush, not getting to the point, you're really not helping the person that you are giving the feedback to. Similarly, if you're too confrontational, if you're on the attack mode, that's not helpful either, because people on the receiving end will generally run the other way, or they'll just ignore the feedback that was given to them and not accept it as valid. So that's not helpful either. If when you give feedback or peer review, you focus on minutia rather than the things that are really important, that's not helpful either. And people receiving that, they'll understand that. But indeed, sometimes the details are important, and when they are, that's when you need to comment on them. It's really, really important when you give feedback or peer review to also compliment people. And actually, a nice way to start out in peer review and feedback is to start out with those positives. It sets a nice groundwork for people when they're reading it to start out with something positive. They're more receptive later when the negative things start coming. If you start with the negative, it's a little harder later. Sometimes the people stop reading and they won't even get to the positives. So lay out the positives first. And then remember too that peer review isn't just for the bad times when things go wrong. Peer review is also for the good times. There's a few different types of peer review or feedback. They can be done by committees or individual people. You'll often see committee peer review done in settings of grant reviews because they want lots of opinions or protocols. So for example, if you're going to do some clinical research and you've written a protocol, that often goes to committee. And certainly things like confirmation of candidature in the setting of master's and PhD, committees are involved. Then there's also blinded and unblinded. So sometimes the person giving peer review who receives your document or your work knows who you are, and sometimes they don't. So that information is given or not given. And that has its pluses and its minuses as well. Certainly in the clinical setting, you're going to know where your feedback is coming from. Now, tips for giving peer review, and I've got a reference there on the bottom. It's a hyperlink to a really nice site about really giving effective commentary back to people, ways to communicate in an effective way. So I encourage you to check that out at some point in time. But overall, it's important to know that, believe it or not, you can be pleasant and critical at the same time. It's going to take some skill, it's going to take some practice, but you can do it. And as I said, it's really helpful if you suggest to people ways that they can improve. So not just pointing out the negatives or the ways that they failed, the things that perhaps went wrong, but also showing how things can be fixed or improved. That's really great. So showing solutions to people is a great idea. And again, don't get too hooked up on the little tiny things. There are people available to take care of those little tiny things like copy editors. Something else is you want to be realistic about what your peers can achieve. And again, you have to be careful on how you phrase what you're phrasing. And a lot of times you're going to have to bring people in personally to talk about things. It may not be the best way to write it all down and give it to them, or you do that, but you talk to them first. And be open and honest. Don't pretend you're an expert when you're really not an expert. That's really a bad thing. You need to have credibility. This is interesting, and it's really not rocket science when you think about it, but if you're in the position of having to give feedback or peer review, two big guides here for you. First of all, don't do it when you're in a bad mood. It's not the best time because you're probably going to transfer those negative emotions to the paper, or even verbally if you're going to be doing verbal feedback to the person that you're with. So don't do it in a bad mood. Reschedule, do it another time. Same thing if you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're, just not optimized, don't do it. You're not doing yourself a favor, and you're certainly not doing the person that you're reviewing any favors. So don't go there. Responding to peer review. This is probably the bigger area that we need to get into, where people have more problems. First of all, don't have a public temper tantrum. And that means public, either public in a hallway with your friends venting. If you're upset, that's okay to be upset, but do it in a private setting where patients can't hear it and other healthcare workers can't hear it, because I guarantee you it'll go around. Also, don't have a public temper tantrum in social media. So don't get on the internet and Twitter and Facebook and all these other places and rant and rave about your peer review. Again, this will get traced back to you and it won't be good for you. So be professional. Same thing as with the guidance about emails and sending texts. Wait and calm down before you respond. I know in my own case, anytime I get a peer review back from a journal, I read it, and I generally read it right away because I'm really eager to know, because I've been waiting probably 6 weeks, maybe 3 months to get the peer review back, so I'm really excited to see it. And after I read it, whether it's good or it's bad, I never respond right away. I put it to the side and I let it sit. And I let it sit for at least 24 hours, usually 48 hours, before I make any sort of response. I don't pick it up again. I don't even glance at it. I put it to the side. And I find that somehow, subconsciously, during those 24 to 48 hours, my mind indeed actually still works on it. It's still processing it. And that's actually a good thing for me. It's processing it in a more quiet way, a way that's not aggressive, not defensive. It's working through things in its own quiet time, and that's very good. So I suggest you give that a try. There are many times, certainly, that peer reviewers are incorrect in their findings. They've quote unquote missed the boat, so to speak. They misinterpreted something. They didn't understand something. They're not perfect. But how you respond back to that is really, really important. You certainly don't want to call them an idiot. You don't want to call them out and embarrass them. That's not the way to go. You have to be quite tactful and quite polite when you address things like that. But certainly it is appropriate to address things that are incorrect or invalid. Mostly you need to ask yourself, really sit back and reflect. Are these comments, do they make sense? Am I willing to accept them? Am I willing to embrace them and learn from them? Or do I have some of my own internal issues, problems, biases that I need to work on? Or are those things preventing me from, moving forward with this information that I have? You've got to have to sit with it and ask yourself that each time you get a peer review back. Now, there's lots of ways to cope with criticism, and some are good, most of them are bad, at least the ones I've got on this slide here. So you can choose to get defensive, you can get angry, shut down, withdraw, attack the person who is criticizing you, assign blame, whether it's the person who is in fact criticizing you or other people around you. You can stew about it and chomp and chew and just masticate over and over and over about it. You can just read it and ignore it and put it away. You can receive it, reflect, and act on it. Stop, think, act. That's really the best plan. The other ones there are going to get you into a variety of ways of trouble, or they're going to prevent you from growing personally. And that's what we don't want, either of those situations. So receive, then reflect, then act. That requires you to actually stop and think before you act. Another approach you can try for yourself really is to put on a new pair of glasses, to think with a new lens in terms of what is exactly happening with peer review and feedback, and view it as not about you as a person, but more about your behavior and your actions, the things that you're doing or that you're not doing. That's a whole new lens, a whole new frame to think with. Give it a try. I've listed for you here a PDF file. It's not a very long document, and it's very easy to read. Actually, the font is quite large, so it makes the document quite a quick read, and it's full of some great guidance on how to deal with negative criticism. So I encourage you to take a look at it. But one of the take-home messages in this document is to actually view criticism, feedback, peer review as a gift. It's something given to you that it can actually help you in your performance. And I know in my situation personally, when I look back on the dozens and dozens of papers that I've published, wow, I would not have wanted those papers to get published without peer review. Some of them definitely should not have been published without peer review, and peer review made those papers great. The comments that were given to me from some of the best researchers in the world in my specific research area helped send me back to the drawing board sometimes, or at least back to the desk with my pen and paper to relook at things, reformulate things, rephrase things, whatever it may be. Generally, it always made my work, my paper, my research much better. And that is a gift. And that's a free gift. You can't even put a price tag on that. And you're getting that from highly skilled people, the best in the West, as we would say. So take it as a gift. Now, here's the point in time where we want to encourage you to do a bit of an activity. So you can essentially stop the slides or stop the video and read this abstract and try to find ways in which you would give somebody feedback on this abstract. And so stop it now if you'd like, read the whole thing, and find different ways that you would point out issues with the abstract, negative, positive, whatever, for the author of this abstract. And the next slide will also be a continuation of the abstract in terms of the references. So here are the references, 3 references that go with that abstract. So again, I encourage you to take a look at these as part of the activity. Just stop the slides, stop your podcast, take a look at what sort of feedback you would give the author on their references. So here's what we've got here in terms of looking at the abstract itself and the basic feedback given on the content of that abstract. And you can see how it's not personalized, it's not written in attack mode, it's just very matter of fact and to the point, but not personalized at all, but indeed very helpful. And yes, some of it is detail oriented, but you know what, in medicine, something like this, when you're reporting a case, the details do matter. So if you want to stop the slides here, stop the podcast to read all these comment flags, go right ahead. The next slide will take a look at the references. So we've got 2 things happening here. We've got the references, the comments to those on the right hand side. And again, you can see, yes, indeed, these are very detail oriented. But again, when you're doing referencing work, details count, so that other people down the line can in fact find your references. They may need to use them for clinical care. So it's really important that references be accurate. But also notice what we've got there on the bottom in the yellow highlights. We've given back also some positive feedback to the author, and we put that first. So, quote, "This is a fascinating and important piece of work. However, key details are missing. Please refer to the comment flags to enhance the clinical details of the abstract while ensuring the references satisfy Vancouver style. And you notice again the way this is written, it's not in attack mode, it's not personal, it's neutral, it's giving help. And that's what you want to do, because the purpose of this is to help people improve their performance. So again, you're welcome to freeze frame this for a bit to study those comments. And just in closing, you might like this humorous YouTube video about what children can teach us about peer review. Thanks for watching.